With me again is Dave Williams, and this time we're going to talk about your career as a talk radio host, which kind of began in the mid-70s after doing top 40 radio for a while. And you did some big markets, Los Angeles, Dallas, Sacramento. So those are wonderful experiences that I'd like to, revisit here, Dave.
Happy to, Alex. Good to see you again. Thank you very much. When you talk about talk radio, there are two different ways to mean that. One is just what we'll call in the business the spoken word, which can include news, sports talk, religious conversations, anything where people are talking as opposed to playing music. But talk radio is generally separate from news radio. And I've done both, and I've done a combination of the two, which is a little unusual and which worked out very well in Sacramento. Mm-hmm. So anyway, mid 70s, I started working at the old KCRA radio, which was down on 310 10th Street, across the street from the Crystal Creamery, and with Channel 3 in the same building. And we were doing. I was working at KCTC at the time, which was FM, all good music station.
Beautiful music.
Beautiful music. Well, they call it the California sound.
Okay.
Differentiated from beautiful music and certainly not elevator music. It was, upbeat, up tempo, mostly instrumentals. Anyway, so I was doing production there, that is creating commercials and so forth. And then I got called over to the other side of the building at KCRA, and they asked me to do the same thing there, be the production director, which was a pretty good gig because it's a lot of fun to write and produce commercials and to get paid for it. And not only to get paid for it, but I actually had a little percentage of the monthly profits. So that was cool. Somehow, and I really can't remember exactly what it was, I got called across the hall into the news department, and they said, "We need somebody to do the." Honestly, it's also fuzzy to me because I'd never done news. I'd never had any intention of doing news. I never desired to be a journalist of any kind. It just happened, and that's what I did for 44, 46 years, something like that. I did have a talk show differentiated from news there at KCRA, KGNR at the time. They changed the call letters. And I did an early evening talk show. And boy, that was a real awakening because I found out something interesting, Alex, something that I guess I kind of suspected but never really thought about at that time. I was very young. I was maybe, I was in my 20s, 20-something, probably 25, 26. And I found out that just by virtue of the fact that I was on the radio talking about big issues and world news and stuff, people believed me. People believed that I knew what I was talking about.
Is that because the medium is the message? Do you?
Yes. Yes. And I made a kind of a habit of going on the air at the time and saying, folks, I appreciate the respect, but I'm not sure that I'm worthy all the time because, frankly, I never went to college. I've never studied, journalism or news in any way, shape, or form. I don't follow the news any closer than anybody else, except now that I'm doing this show, I kind of pay a little more attention to some of the details. But I said, the fact of the matter is, it's like I'm 25 years old. I don't know what I'm talking about. So, if your initial opinion or your thoughts about something are different than mine, let's talk about that. And you'd be surprised how often then from then on people changed my mind about things.
Now, at that time, this was before the fairness doctrine was, overturned in 1987. You were doing this in the mid 70s. So you had to give equal time, or you had to be more objective in your presentation, right?
You know what? I have no idea what that was all about. I'm not sure that I was ever informed of the fairness doctrine whenever that happened or whatever it amounted to.
But basically, you're supposed to give people with opposing views time on the air if you're going in one direction.
Well, that was just kind of protocol, really. At least in the places that I've worked, it always just seemed fair, reasonable, and useful for the audience. Let's hear what the other side says.
So what was your mindset back then? Were you pretty open-minded?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, I was I was in my 20s. I was a registered Democrat, and for what few times I voted Democrat. Over the years, things change. And I know everybody's heard this. You get more conservative when you've lived longer. You've got a different perspective. Your perspective primarily designed by the lifestyle that you have, the kind of the family that you've managed to put together, and your concerns are different. Your concerns on the big scale and the small. Basically speaking, if you were to ask me right now, I'm completely independent, and by that I mean I'm independent of political thought. Period. I just don't care anymore. I did it for so long, for so many years, talking about, and it was one of the things. Honestly, it was one of the things that if I was to make a list of pros and cons about when I retired this last October, on the pro list would have been, I really don't want to spend another year talking about Biden and Trump. I really, really, really don't want to do that.
It's a burnt topic.
And then if Trump wins, we're going to be talking about him nonstop and court cases and accusations and all that political nonsense. And I've just had enough of it. Politically, I'm conservative in terms of national issues, economic deals, international things. But I'm very liberal in terms of stuff that involves people's lives, and the way we live and the opportunity.
Talk radio even political back then in the 70s? Or
no, not really. There was some give and take back then. We're talking about Jimmy Carter's presidency.
Yeah,
and the Iran hostage crisis. That's a funny aspect of that first talk show that I did in the evenings. I started doing the talk show, and then I don't know, like a month later, maybe, hostages. There were students in Iran that took American hostages, 20 or 30 some hostages. Remember that? It was called the Iran hostage crisis. And it went on for 444 days. And that's all we could talk about.
Right. Late 79 through early 81.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right. So it's like, oh my God, please can't we talk about something else for a change?
Yeah.
So, but then I got into doing morning news shows, and that's it. That's what I did for the rest of my career.
Okay, so you were at KGNR, 81 to 85. You did a morning show with Bob Nathan, right? How about that show?
Yeah, that was at KGNR. Then the two of us together went to KFBK in 85. And
now tell that story. Why did you make that transition from KGNR to KFBK?
Because I've thought about it so many times, I'm not sure that I know all the details myself, to be honest with you. But I do know this, that from my perspective, KGNR had offered me a contract, which was a great vote of confidence. Wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was certainly a lot more than I was making. And I was very excited about it. I said, absolutely, let's do that. They said, as soon as we get it back from the lawyers, we'll sign it. Well, that didn't happen. Weeks went by, and then months went by, and nothing happened. And I found out that it was sitting in the boss's desk drawer, unsigned and unpresented to me. So I was a little bit perturbed about that. I heard from the general manager at KFBK at the time, Paul Aaron, said, "Why don't you come over and let's talk about, having you work over here?"
Because at the time, wasn't your show #1 on KGNR?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was.
In the morning?
Right. Well, the show that we took over there, KCRA/KGNR, whichever it was at the time, it was already the #1 morning show in Sacramento. Okay. We didn't do that, but we didn't lose it either. And then when we went to KFBK, lo and behold, the audience found us and followed us in huge numbers. And we never looked back. We were #1 for 15 years there. So about total about 20 years. And you know what it really boiled down to is that we were just doing things differently than news stations were typically programmed. And that was to just deliver the news with no opinion, with no bias, with no color, no analysis to speak of. It was just read the news. And stations were very proud of that. It seemed like the right thing to do. And Bob and I, here's the thing, neither of us ever had any inclination or desire to be news people. I mean, what I used to say was, I don't care. I'm a radio guy. That's all. I don't care if I'm playing records or phone calls or newscasts. Doesn't make any difference to me. I got into radio to attract an audience, entertain them, and keep them hanging around. People are smart enough to know the difference between fact and opinion. There was at the time, there was also a huge problem for the typical news people, that if you did commercials, oh my God, that was horrible. That was just yes, exactly. It was you had no believability at that point. I said, you know what? I believe that my audience is smart enough to know the difference between when I'm talking about a news story and when I'm talking about a product or service, that's a commercial. So we were allowed to do that, and it worked out fine. Worked out better than fine, actually. The station made money, we made money, and a lot of stations have changed and kind of gone in that direction since then.
Now, you were a program director at KFBK, right?
Yeah, I was for about a year. Shortly after we got there, I was offered that job along with the morning show, and I said, "Oh, okay." So that was kind of fun. I enjoyed programming, but after a year, I decided it's too much. And the big problem wasn't the amount of time I was spending doing radio work. It was the fact that I was doing two separate jobs that were very different. On one hand, I was being the morning personality. We were not rude. We weren't crude. We didn't tell foul or offensive humor. But you do things that that a program director would go, you screwed up the timing. You didn't go to traffic on time. You didn't do the weather on time. You were a minute and a half late. That kind of thing. And I was the program director. So that kind of stuff was sitting in my head while I was otherwise on the air with Bob, trying to, just let it flow. I don't care what time we go to traffic. I mean, if I know that there's a huge problem out there, we're going to get to it pretty quickly. It just drove me out of my mind that the format is the tail wagging the dog. I've always said I could be doing an interview with Jesus Christ, and I would have to say, "Hold that thought, Jesus. Like to come right back to you, but first we need to check traffic on the 80, on Highway 80."
Hey, speaking of that, we're at the 15-minute mark, and that's how long I want this part of the interview to be. So let's continue with part 2 on the next video.
Okay. Should I change shirts or something? We're gonna
everything will stay the same. We'll even pick up from where we left off.
Can I go grab a quick cup of coffee?
Yeah, go ahead.